This issue of cheap food is a huge, vital question that needs to be asked more and more. This myth that we have cheap food in America. So the problem is that we've created a system that relies on this mythology of cheap food and this culture, this basically political economy of cheap food, where the whole expectation in America now is that we're going to spend a small portion of our overall dollar on food, when in Europe, for instance, they pay far more of their dollar for food. Now, I'm not one to argue that we need to pay more for food necessarily when there's so many poor people in America who are going hungry or almost going hungry, or don't have, 1 in 5 Americans doesn't have a daily reliable source of food. And those who have it are often struggling to get by. The problem is that so many of us are buying this food that is called cheap food, when in actuality there are a host of huge, immense costs that we're all paying that are invisible. So when we have this diet that is based on all these heavily processed foods, all these corn sweeteners and everything else, and then all the meat in our diets as well, we get a situation where we have roughly 500,000 people dying each year from heart disease. We're spending upwards of $100 billion a year, billion with a B, on diet-related diseases and illnesses. We're seeing a crisis of overweight and obesity in America. 65% of people overweight or obese in America, and of course that's a pre-indicator for potential heart disease or diabetes. Kids, in the 1970s, you might have had 4% of kids overweight or obese. Now it's more than 15% of kids overweight or obese. These are all costs that we pay. We pay them in our daily lives, in the way that we live, but we also pay them in the costs, again, to treat all of these various forms of illnesses and that come out of the diets that we have in America from this cheap food system. The other key area that doesn't get talked about very much is labor. The workers behind our food system are intensely exploited. Our entire food system actually depends on intensely exploited labor. It's important for people to think about that all the food we get would not cost what it costs, would not exist without this super exploited labor force. From farm workers, 2/3 of whom live in poverty, to meat packing and chicken factory workers who I've interviewed and researched, who are getting injured at phenomenal rates. Carpal tunnel, more than 7 times the average worker rate. Workers getting chewed up and spat out like disposable people, basically. And many of them are chronically injured and unable to work either at all or very much for the rest of their lives, or they need health care in public health care facilities because they're not provided any health care. So these are all costs that we pay for the harm that is caused by this food system run by these handful of corporations. Same with environment, all the environmental pollution, all the cleanup. Sometimes there's a good lawsuit that forces the company to pay for the cleanup. That lawsuit can take years and cost millions of dollars to pursue that lawsuit, through multiple rounds in court. These are all coming out of our tax dollars. So we're paying once at the supermarket or in the restaurant. Then we're paying in our tax dollars through the subsidy system. And then we're paying again for the unspoken, hidden costs from this supposedly cheap food system. Our beef supply, our chicken supply, if you look at our whole meat system, we have what is thought of now as a very scientific system of food safety in America in terms of analyzing in the lab and protocols, and they have this system called HACCP, which food safety inspectors call have a cup of coffee and pray. And it's really about hazard analysis, critical control points. But this whole system that has enabled the meat industry over time, through their lobbies, by the way, the meat industry, so including beef, chicken, pork, all these industries have lobbied government successfully under both Republican and Democrat administrations to radically increase the line speeds in these facilities to the point where in chicken, for instance, you've got, it went from 90 birds a minute in the late 1990s up to 140, in some factories 175 birds a minute today in these factories. In beef and pork, it's a little slower because the animal is bigger, but you're still talking about phenomenal rates and workers making tens of thousands of cuts on animal parts each day as these chunks of meat go flying by. And part of what's been going on with food safety inspection is removing food safety inspectors, government inspectors, from the line and putting them either into analyzing lab results or basically looking over company records and reviewing the results and the notes of company employees. So more and more companies are inspecting their own meat production. And they're lobbying the government right now, as we speak, to get even more of that happening. More self-inspection, more fox guarding the hen house in meat production. We also, again in chicken, just to give another example, it's horrific. The conditions in these facilities are horrific for everybody. And we have case after case after case of meat piling up on the floor, meat covered with fecal matter, and this stuff just gets reprocessed or put back into the assembly line. And it's up to the consumer to cook the crap out of it, as they say. This is even worse when you get to situations like ground beef, where you're talking about hundreds or thousands of animals being mixed together into a single burger patty, but none of it is safe. And they test the tiniest portion. They'll take a couple samples from each shift to test for, say, in chicken, salmonella, or they might test for listeria in certain cases, although companies in beef are afraid to test for listeria because then they'd have to clean up their entire operation. So they've resisted testing for listeria in beef for years. When we had the mad cow crisis in America, there was a constant push for more testing, and it was still the tiniest sample of America's beef production was actually being tested, whereas for pennies on the dollar, Japan was testing almost their entire beef supply. So there's been this resistance by the meat industry and the poultry industry to have real vigorous inspection of food safety, and this is our consuming public. This is our health at risk. And the results of this, are we're seeing tens of millions of Americans getting sick every year from the food they eat. So we have these huge outbreaks of salmonella, listeria, campylobacter in chicken, and huge recalls, tons of waste, that comes out of that, as well as food poisonings. So it's a terrible situation with minimal and decreasing regulation and enforcement. Now, I was really pleased to be invited to be a part of the Real Truth About Health conference. We don't get that many opportunities to share the research that we do, the investigations we do with the public. There is a general sort of media blackout almost, or mostly blacked out. It's almost like an eclipse, where we're not hearing the vast majority of the truth about how our food is made, whether it's safe for us, healthy for us, everybody else. I'm grateful and happy that we have conferences like this. I think it's vital that it be made free to the public. I'm excited to see more of these conferences happen here and elsewhere around the country. I've always been an advocate of seeing how we can get conferences like this into places where more people see them. Whether it's online, of course, where more and more stuff is happening, but also in person, like poor areas that have no access to this information, may not even always have internet access. So I think it's excellent what's happening here and in some other parts of the country. There's not nearly enough of it. And they've done a great job at this conference of bringing in people. You know, I've learned a lot coming here myself about other aspects of the food system that I didn't know about, and you know, how plants operate and other more scientific pieces of the puzzle. So, you know, it's great for all of us, really, to learn from each other. When we did our panel, we learned a lot from each other, I think, you know, about different aspects of the food production system and climate change and the environment. So, you know, I think it's a great opportunity for all of us, really, to learn from each other and to teach people, just share the information and share the, you know, the analysis. Sometimes you get to share, you know, little sound bites here and there, but to get the time to really talk through the issues and to explain why, you know, why we're in the mess that we're in with food, I think is critical. Otherwise, we're not going to really fix it.